Okay, we are live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Cosmopolitics and Barbara Starr Reports. I'm Elise Labott, thrilled to be here with my good friend, former colleague, CNN Pentagon correspondent extraordinaire, currently a fellow at USC Annenberg's Center for Leadership and Center on Communication Leadership and Policy, Barbara Starr. Welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. The most important title is Friend of Elise Labott.
Exactly. I mean, Barbara and I get together for coffee and discuss this stuff for kind of semi-fun. So it's good to bring our audience into everything that's going on. We were just saying that the news never stops. Like, we were texting last night, oh, what should we talk about? What should we talk about? And then this morning it's something new, and it's kind of the incoming is never ending. Barbara, let's start with some of the news out there. I think one of the things we thought was pretty remarkable is what's going on with Poland and how, I think Putin is kind of testing the limits of NATO. Launched some drones in Polish airspace. They shot it down, and now NATO Poland has called for Article 4, which is, as everyone knows, Article 5 is, if an attack of one is attack against everyone, Article 4 is triggering consultations on discussing whether Article 5 should be invoked. So this is the first time since the war, and only the eighth time in NATO's history.
Yeah, yesterday the news was about the Israeli attack in Doha, and then last night suddenly these messages start crossing about what the Russians are doing. And the question, of course, is why are they doing this? And I think you pointed it out correctly, Elise. I think what they're doing is testing what happens if they do go into NATO Polish, but NATO airspace. The drones, the Russians say, were aimed at targets in Ukraine. Okay, but 19 drones, according to the polls, I believe, entered their
Just
airspace.
fell into Polish airspace.
Yeah,
by
just
accident.
just drifted in. No accident when it's that many. So the Poles, along with some of the allies in that region, took some pretty quick action, and I believe there's very reliable reporting that they shot some of them down. And it's one, it's a concern because these are drones and they can drift off course. So that's a big concern, but also a big concern that NATO did very strongly respond to this. The U.S. so far, no indication the U.S. was involved in the military action against the drones last night, but there was a very strong statement from the U.S. ambassador to NATO. So now I think we have to see where it goes. But Putin, it's another step on the road to him thinking he can get away with it, that not much will be done about it.
Well, the two things are whether Putin could get away with it, and also I don't think it's a coincidence that he did this kind of just like a week or so. Is it a week or so after the Pentagon said that it's ending funding for training and equipping militaries in Eastern Europe?
Well, that's right. Now, worth remembering, the U.S. has somewhere between, let's say, 7 to 10,000 U.S. troops in Poland, and is building a base there that President Trump wants. So President Trump has put down a marker that he is a military supporter of Poland. It's going to be tough to see how they pull back from all of this, but if they are truly ending military support for that eastern flank in Europe, how should Putin read that other than the U.S. Is not going to challenge him. And
Yeah, we can stay as long as we stay at it. Okay, so we tested Poland, but if the US is stopping training other countries on the eastern
right.
flank, we just stay after Poland, but we can go after some of those other ones. The
Well,
Baltics are
that's
freaking
right. I
out.
mean, the signal is, I don't see how, I think many analysts would agree. The signal is lack of US resolve against Russia. Another mark on the wall of that lack of resolve. It's hard to read. I think it's very hard to read it any other way.
Yeah. Yeah. And the president keeps saying he's unhappy. He's unhappy. I think it was I don't know. It was some TV show. Might have been John Oliver. Could have been Abby Phillip on CNN. Who knows? But it was just replaying every time Trump has said, "I'm unhappy with Putin."
You know,
What does that mean?
I'm unhappy, and we're going to see something in 2 weeks. Those, I think, are his two favorite expressions. But we're now coming to, the point at which Putin is taking steps. How, the critical military, international security question, strategic safety, if you will, question is how far do you let Vladimir Putin put his boot inside NATO territory?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and this is a question for U.S. security as well. President wants to defend U.S. interests. Well, it starts with stopping Putin before he comes into NATO territory.
I don't think the president really makes that. So here, okay, if the US is in Poland, I don't think the president really, if he doesn't go after US bases, I don't know that he really makes the connection that going into NATO countries is against US interests because the US is on the other side of the Atlantic. And I'm not sure he really sees this Ukraine war as in US interest. But I will say what Putin is doing is really a middle finger to the president after all the president's efforts on Ukraine. And we can quibble about whether he's been successful or not. He is expending, a lot of effort and political capital to try and, end the war. Again, we could definitely quibble about the success of that or the futility of that. But he is making a lot of effort and invited President Putin to Alaska. And then to do this really is, it's one thing not to end the war and continue to go against Ukraine, but to continue to do this and expand the war really is showing President Trump that disrespect. And maybe that's something President Trump would understand. I haven't really seen any comments about it yet.
Well, I mean, yeah, because we know, and Trump, I think, well knows the only thing Putin respects is power.
And force
Very
and show of
strong
force.
show of
Right.
power. And I think it's logical to think that with Vladimir Putin, when he looks at Donald Trump, he sees a guy talking, talking, talking.
Indecisiveness.
Right. And what Putin needs to see is some actual show of strength and resolve that goes beyond that. And if that's ramping up U.S. weapons shipments to Ukraine again, that may go a long way. I think Putin looks at Trump and just does not see the will in the White House to stop what he wants to do.
Let's move on quickly to Qatar, and I just want to know what you thought of that strike by Israel into Qatar. I think it's also, you saw President Trump was not happy about that. That was something that he did kind of come out and say that's not in U.S. interest because, obviously one of the biggest bases or the biggest base in the Middle East is in Qatar. The U.S. was negotiating on behalf of Israel with
Yeah.
these particular guys in Qatar. Again, we can talk about Qatar's host of Hamas. We can talk about Qatar playing a double game. But at the same time, I think going into this, doing what they did, again, I just think is very disrespectful and not appreciative of what the U.S. is trying to do to
Well, I
end the.
think the White House statement yesterday that Carolyn Levitt read out at the White House briefing. I mean, I think everybody has commented on how interesting the words were. First of all, there's no indication that Netanyahu directly phoned the president and told him this would be happening. The White House openly said that they learned of it from the U.S.
U.S.
military.
military.
Side note, no indication they learned of it from Pete Hegseth. Much more likely they learned of it through U.S. military channels. So the question becomes, what exactly transpired there? Did the U.S. military have some last minute notification from the Israelis to ensure that the U.S. knew it was a friendly country sending these weapons into the air? Or did U.S. assets, such as satellites or radars, pick up the movement and understand that it was coming from Israeli assets? We don't really know the answer to that yet. But what it does show us is, again, it's a fascinating thing. It's not like Bibi Netanyahu even thought he had to tell President Trump. And this has to be, or should be, quite concerning to the president. And I think it's why we're seeing some of this language about this yesterday from the White House.
Well, listen to what President Trump said in his Truth Social. Unilaterally bombing, he made it very clear he had nothing to do with it. He didn't know. He tried to, there's a little bit of a discrepancy of whether the U.S. tried to warn Qatar, but he said unilaterally bombing inside Qatar, a sovereign nation capitalized and close ally of the United States that is working very hard and bravely taking risks with us to broker peace, does not advance Israel or America's goals. So, you know, that was a slapdown, but I don't think Netanyahu cares, really.
Well, and that's the interesting thing. I'm not trying to go, over the edge too far down the road, as they say, but it sure is interesting. In, a 2-day period, you have two world leaders, Bibi Netanyahu and Vladimir Putin, basically taking action and clearly not giving any concern to what the U.S. president may think about it. They just don't care.
Well, and also, I mean, I was talking to this one source of mine, and he's like, it was a mistake, it was arrogant, and it was inelegant. It's just like, I just think it's like Israel just trying to deliberately isolate itself. I just thought it was a bad idea. Forget
Yeah,
about what a disrespect it was to the US or whatever. Every country needs to take actions in their own interest. I just thought it was like such a stupid idea. I just thought it was not a good idea. And, that's not going to end the war. I think there's very little payoff. Clearly, they didn't kill these guys, but there's very little payoff. Like the only thing that's really going to end this is to find, a post Gaza Palestinian
yeah, I think
government.
that's right, because what we know about military action, no matter what country takes it, including, of course, topping the list, the U.S., any military action by a country comes at a price. Basically, U.S. strongest military in the world, the U.S. military, under orders, could engage in any number of military actions. But the assessment is, what is the risk? What is the gain? Is it worth the price you pay? And clearly, Putin and Netanyahu in the last 2 days thought what they were doing was worth the price, and that's puzzling. That's very puzzling.
Yeah. I want to get to Venezuela and this boat. And I say Venezuela because there seems to be this like bee in the US bonnet about Venezuela that might not be related to this drug boat that the US shot, because it said there were drugs bound for the United States. Then later, Rubio, Secretary of State slash National Security Advisor Rubio, said, "Oh well, they were probably bound for Trinidad." And I know you have some pretty strong feelings about this, so break it down for us.
Well, I think there's some logical assessments to be made. Now, by the way, Pete Hegseth apparently has said in an interview that he watched the strike. They knew exactly what that boat was all about. They knew
And
what
who
was
was
on it,
aboard? Right.
and they knew where it was headed. So if it's going to Trinidad and it's got drugs on it, is that the question to be asked? Is that a lethal mission of killing people
For an imminent threat.
in imminent danger to the U.S.? Because you're going down a road here, how many drug boats? It, it's a question for the administration to answer and for lawyers in the White House and the Pentagon to answer. How far do you go with this? And
Yeah,
my
we don't know the proof. Grace is asking, where's the proof? We
Well,
haven't seen
that's my
any.
question. I mean, if there's going to be a military operation, there's certain standards that have to be met. It has to be legal. It has to be proportional. And that means that the US would have had to have eyes, if you will, on the boat all the way from when it was loaded up in whatever port it was loaded in and have good intelligence that it had drugs aboard and that these 11 people were involved in drug dealing. Otherwise, it's hard to see how the strike was authorized. And I think it would be very interesting to find out, but no one's going to, I think they're going to say the mission's classified, of course, who actually authorized it and what information was transmitted to the U.S. military assets in the region that's shot.
But let's broaden it out, okay? Now the US is declaring these drug cartels as terrorists. And, there's also this loose connection to Venezuela. Like, you know, there's this loose connection to it. Like, let's kind of connect the all the threads and try and weave them together. They're declaring all these drug cartels as terrorists. And the US just is eyeing Puerto Rico as a possible staging ground for some of these. Like, they're going after the drug cartels. War on drugs, just like the war on terrorists. Then there's this loose connection to Venezuela, and some of your former colleagues over at the Pentagon, reporters are wondering, like, is this have something to do with Maduro and regime change? Rubio has gotten a bee in his bonnet about Maduro for many years. And then there's the wider issue of what is the U.S. military doing fighting these guys when drug interdiction is really the responsibility of the Coast Guard.
I think all of that needs to be answered, obviously, and I think it starts with the question, the president declared them terrorists. Okay, set that aside for a minute. But the question really is, are they criminals or are they combatants? The U.S.
I just want everybody to know these are the kind of things you're not getting from anywhere else. This is something like only someone like Barbara is able to break down for us.
Well, it's because, the Pentagon sees no need to have a press conference and hold itself accountable to the American people, but that's another issue you and I could discuss for about 5 hours. So if the U.S. military does not go after criminals, it goes after combatants. Military law and military orders are designed to go after combatants. So even if the cartel is a terrorist, a designation as a terrorist.
Does the U.S. have to declare war against these guys in
And
order to declare them combatants?
and remember, out in the Middle East, in the Persian Gulf especially, U.S. military assets, U.S. Navy ships, they go after drug smugglers, they go after weapons smugglers. You can see years and years of U.S. Navy ships operating in the Persian Gulf going after these small smuggling ships, and they usually
Under
film it.
what
So,
authority?
well, that's the thing, and they're not. They're not actually uh, engaging in war action, if you will. They go under the authority that it's aimed at keeping the region safe. I think that's the most simple.
Or the air waterways.
Right, keeping the waterways open. Um, but what I want the point I think that's important here, when you look at those operations in the Middle East, those are capture and detain operations.
Not kill.
Not kill. They detain people and they take them into the nearest port of an allied nation. They turn them over to that allied nation and have that allied nation's criminal justice system deal with these smugglers. And, I guess I'm wondering why that can't be the case here. Why the outright killing?
So
Nobody
so
says drug dealers are good. Let's just be
yeah,
clear.
no, I know. It's
We
like,
we we
that's
all
not a binary
understand that.
choice. And so is the US at war with these drug cartels? If so, doesn't Congress have to authorize this war? Rand Paul certainly thinks that they do, Senator Rand Paul. Um, and um, or are they going under the AUMF, which the AUMF wasn't that after 9/11 that they authorized that to kind of go to war in
Right.
this war on terror?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I have the legal expertise, to answer all
Well,
of
I
that,
mean,
but the
they haven't even said that what the authority is. I mean, people have loosely assumed that it was the AUMF because that's still out there. But, Hegseth and Rubio say we're going to war with the drug cartels, but what is the authority? Shouldn't Congress be declaring war?
you would think so. And then but again, to me, part of the question is, and just to follow on with what you're saying, is where does that all go from here? How many drug boats are you gonna bomb? How many people are you gonna kill? How will you know,
That
you
you
know,
won.
what it's the key issue in military operations. So easy to get into, very difficult to get out of. How will you know when you're done? How will you get out of this? And what happens if, um, there's this famous cliched saying, no operation survives first contact with the enemy. You think it's going to be so easy. Mistakes happen, weapons go astray. We know this from Afghanistan in the final days of at the airport when that horrible attack happened, and then there was a response and it killed a family. There can be friendly fire. All kinds of things can go wrong. And are you going to limit it just to going after targets in international waters? Are you going to go into sovereign airspace of Venezuela? And that becomes very difficult business to suddenly undertake an overtly offensive military operation against a sovereign state.
Yeah, I want to move on now to this whole militarization of America, if that's what it is. We called it is the America being militarized, but I feel like we see what's happening. Deployment of the National Guards in DC. There's talk about other cities in the country. Um, I'm sure you still talk to some sources. Like, what does the military think about this? Like, that's not their job.
Well, it's not. Now, again, it's like, nobody likes drug dealers, nobody likes terrorists,
No one
nobody,
likes criminals that are carjacking,
right.
our
Everybody
former
wants to
colleagues
see
at
crime
gunpoint.
come down. But it's worth noting that what the National Guard is doing right now is what they're ordered to do. Pick
Don't
up
seem to be
trash,
doing much though.
pick up trash, clean up
Walking around
flower
the
beds,
monuments.
guard monuments where there's tourists. I saw the other day when there was a press release of the daily activities of the National Guard. Apparently, they broke up a fight between two men on the street, a
I
fist
saw
fight.
a bunch of them guarding the Jefferson Memorial when I was there the other day.
Yeah. And so, then the question becomes, okay, again, we all want to see crime come down, but how is this potentially cutting into the readiness and availability of the National Guard should there actually be a military crisis that they're called upon to do, or a natural disaster, such as, a flood, an earthquake, fires, that kind of thing? I mean, again, it's the price you pay for the decisions you make. Are these is this a price you're willing to pay? So far, President Trump is. Uh, I think that many of these cities are making the case they're happy to have the help, but it doesn't address, and again, now we're getting into civilian law enforcement, it doesn't address the real needs of so many police departments around the country, which is for more funding, more people, more personnel, potentially more technology to help when the crimes are committed, process evidence, if you will. There's plenty to do. Not sure the National Guard is the long-term solution to any of
And
this.
there seems to be this conflation between crime and these cities. There is crime in DC, as we know. Like, I live in a pretty ropey, actually, neighborhood that, since COVID has gotten a lot worse. There's a lot of youth crime. Chicago is another city where there is a lot of crime. LA, a lot of crime. San Francisco. But I feel there's a conflation with crime and then the migrant crisis and these ICE deportations. The crime in these cities is mostly young 13, 14 year olds with like no future and nothing to do. They're not migrants, but he seems to be conflating the two.
Well, I think what we're seeing right now, and it is very analogous to military operations, you're seeing essentially a tactical, a short-term, near-term response by the White House. Okay, this is out. Well, this is what we're going to do about it.
And
But
crime is done in DC, by the way. Like, it's over. Trump's done
yeah, it's all good. Um, he went out to dinner last night and declared
because
the
it's
city
finally safe.
safe.
Yeah.
Pardon me and everyone else for pointing out anytime a president moves on city streets, streets are closed off. Law enforcement is there, perhaps in the dozens, if not over 100. Of course, he's safe, and that's as it should be. But are we seeing any long-term solutions to the criminal problem? That's, I think, what mayors, police chiefs, governors, that's what they're looking for, what it's going to take to make long-term change.
Yeah.
And it's not at all clear. National Guard's the answer,
We
long-term.
have we have just a couple minutes left, Barbara, and I want to talk about this whole rebranding of the Pentagon, the Defense Department, as the Department of War. As we know, that was the original name, but that was like, basically was that during the like Revolutionary War? I mean, what do you think of this? And, you know, first of all, I'll just point out two things. President Trump said he was going to get the US out of war. And secondly, President Defense Secretary Hegseth keeps talking about this ethos of war fighting, but he really seems to care more about personnel, like the war on woke stuff. And the only infighting war fighting I feel that's going on is in the building. So I'm just wondering, what you think of this.
This is why I love Substack, because we get to talk and chat and not maybe offer opinions, but just offer observations. So
Observations.
let
Yes.
me observe that when Hegseth talked at the White House ceremony about all of this, um, he had his notes ready to go, and he read all the message points that he wanted to make. It was all very staged, but I think it was President Trump. I think it was Trump. I don't think it was Hegseth. Somebody will have to check me. Who said, yes, we had Department of War Department for many years, and then we went woke and changed it to Defense Department. So let me jump in there. We went woke. The person who changed it, the president who changed it to War Department was Harry S. Truman. I don't know that anybody ever could reasonably label Harry S. Truman as woke. This is the man who took the very critical historic decision to drop the atomic bomb on Japan.
It's a
This
great.
is the man who took the decision to finally officially integrate the US military. That's not woke. These are all critical decisions he made back in the late 1940s and 50s when he was in office to secure the United States as a modern power. And it was also done, of course, because we were entering into the Cold War, where it became clear that international security, and this is perhaps something worth noting for President Trump, international security, true security, was no longer really about loading up on the plane with your guns and going and shooting a bunch of people. It was, in fact, about this fuzzy space emerging in the globe between peace and war. The Cold War was every bit a war, though it largely was not a shooting war. And these are the reasons you have a Department of Defense, I think. These are the reasons that the fundamental job of the Department of Defense, in fact, is not to go to war, but to defend the nation's interests and be ready for war if it happens. And you do see Hegseth now in the last couple of days emphasizing peace and that the U.S. military is all about being ready, but advocating for peace in the world. I don't think there's anytime soon we're going to see a Department of Peace, but what a thought if we did.
Yeah. Well, that's a great way to close it up. Again, I just want to point out that, Barbara, you connect these dots in a way that few can. So I think, this was a
Well, it's
great
great chatting with
conversation.
you and all of the listeners out there.
Yep. Great conversation, and let's do it again soon.
You bet. Take
Thanks
care.
everybody for watching. Until next time. Bye. We'll post this on Cosmopolitics, and Barbara will post it too, so you can all watch it if you didn't catch the whole thing. Thanks a lot. Bye, Barb.
Bye, Lise.